My name is Dusty King with King & King, and I'm here with D. Wright with The Starting Place, and this is our 5th episode of the emotional management series that we're putting together. And today we want to talk about just kind of an overall picture of marriage and I guess kind of being an adult to a certain extent. We have in our mindset when we're kids, we're going to grow up, we're going to get married, and we're going to have children. And the reality, and this is supposed to be this kind of Hallmark movie, picturesque scene. Right. And the reality is most of the time different than what we have pictured in our head. And for example, people get married and things are going along fine, and they may hit a bump in the road, and they decide, well, let's have a child. That'll make everything better. From my perspective, that rarely works out. Now, granted, I'm a divorce attorney, so I see the times that it doesn't work out. Right. There may be other times that it does work out. But what are the problems? What are the pitfalls with a mentality like that?
Well, if you already have trouble and if you already have a fire and you pour gas on the fire, it's not going to get smaller.
Right.
And so the idea being that, if you think that having a child is going to make things better, you have to understand that's going to add stress. How is that going to make things better? So if you are thinking that your marriage is struggling already, then you're already, if you started out going down the same path, you're already starting to venture down separate paths. Mm-hmm. How in the world do you think you're going to co-parent?
Right.
And that just adds way more pressure, way more stress, and it makes things so much worse.
Right, and earlier off camera we were talking about roles in a family and in a marriage, mm-hmm. and I really like the analogy that you have of the family is a bubble, but inside that bubble is the marriage bubble.
Correct.
What I've seen in some cases, and ladies, men are emotional creatures too, even though we don't like to admit it, and what I've seen in the past is you will have moms, mm-hmm. especially new mothers, mm-hmm. and they just latch on with every part of their being into the role of being a mother, and sometimes,
which is appropriate to some degree.
Sure, if that's what's expected, then that's what should happen. However, in a marriage, typically before you're a mother, you're also a wife.
Right.
And although husbands may not admit it as much as they should, we like a little attention. We like to know that we're loved too.
Right.
And what happens in my office is a guy may come in and he simply say, well, we just fell out of love, or I really don't know what happened. We just don't, we make real good roommates now and even co-parent really well, but we're just not in love anymore. Mm-hmm. I think that's a more common problem than anybody wants to speak about right now.
Oh, I totally agree.
And it's not just, I'm not picking on women by any stretch of the imagination. I think it can go with the husbands too, but you become so focused either on being a mother or even being a career person or a provider yeah. that you lose focus of your job as a spouse.
Right.
What are some tips how to avoid that, how to even be aware that that's happening?
Well, what I just said, realizing you're going down different paths, that's a real red flag. When you feel like you're pulling apart, or maybe you don't really know your spouse anymore, you're starting to be surprised that they're reacting in certain ways to certain things. There are smaller red flags, and then there are bigger red flags.
Right.
When they start to, if you start watching TV in separate rooms, if you start falling asleep with the kids and not going to bed, those are red flags. I mean, people like to think, well, I just have to, lay down with the kids and I just fall asleep, and which that's really innocent stuff.
Right.
But the idea being that the marriage requires nurturing. I mean, it's really easy to get married. It's way harder to stay married.
Right.
I mean, and that's just reality. because there's a lot of balls to be juggled.
Right.
I mean, now, you're in this scenario. We've got you're a mother or a parent.
Right.
And you're a provider and you are a spouse. I mean, that's a lot of stress. That's a lot of stuff to be trying to keep all the balls in the air, so to speak. And so we have to be realistic. We have to understand that every relationship requires nurturing. If I call you my friend, but I never see you and I never talk to you, how good friends are we really?
Right.
And so relationships, whether it's with your friends, your spouse, your children, whatever, all relationships require nurturing. And so in a marriage scenario, if you aren't being intentional about loving on that person, bad things are going to happen. Bad things are to come. So you're kind of setting yourself up for negative things to happen, for a chasm to be put between the two of you.
And not trying to take this to the extreme, but when it gets to my office, this is a lot of times these things are manifested in, quite honestly, someone cheating on the other person.
Right.
And it's not necessarily the guy that is committing the adultery, but let's just use that as an example. In a lot of instances, when you get to talking to the person about what led them to this, they were not feeling loved at home. Mm-hmm. They were really good roommates. They were good, for lack of a better term, they were good business partners, and their business was the family. Yeah. Not the marriage, but the family.
That's right.
So they could get the kids to soccer practice, they could get the kids to school, the kids were their focus, and then they wind up losing sight of each other. And neither one of us are trying to tell anybody to ignore your kids. That's not what we're doing here. But understand that typically you start off as a couple before you add the child to the mix. And in fact, I can't imagine any situation where the kid comes before you're at least a couple in some respects. Now, it may not be a long-standing relationship. Yeah. It may even be a one-night stand. But you had to know that person before the child comes along.
Right. At least for 5 or 10 minutes.
At least for a few minutes.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna go down that path and you try to have a long-standing marriage or relationship, I do think it's key to understand that you're wearing different hats. You're taking on these different roles.
Absolutely. It is really easy to say, to have an ideal picture and to create expectations. But how realistic those expectations and that picture are is a whole other story too.
Right.
And so being able to say, well, I'm a planner, and so I think that having some kind of goal set for your life, here's how I would like to see my life play out, just as guidelines. Not as a hard, fast. Right. It has to happen this way because there's only so much we can control. But just having an idea of what you want your life to look like, and being able to say, when this is secure, then this. Mm-hmm. When this is secure, then this. And so giving yourself some kind of a playbook, if you will, where you can say, my plan is this, but be flexible. And when marriage comes into that, and then the idea of children, whatever order that comes in,
sure.
Sometimes life just happens, and so whatever order that comes in, my thinking is if you're going to create a relationship, you have to be able to nurture that relationship.
Right.
And so spend the time to do that is my point.
Sure. I would also add in on that, it's great to plan. I'm a planner myself. I used to pride myself in planning about 5 years out and know kind of where I was going. Then I finally got old enough to realize you can plan all you want to. It's not always going to work out that way.
Right.
But there's also a lot of joy that can come from not knowing and kind of riding that roller coaster of where life takes you. Mm-hmm. You can steer a little bit, but don't get so bottled up and rigid in the plan.
Right.
The other thing I think is a great point that you're hitting on. when you start considering marriage and considering children, it's not just you planning anymore.
Exactly.
So,
your plan's not the only one that counts.
That's right. And that communication is key. Talking to the other person to make sure we're going down the same path as opposed to veering into two different paths. Because you can plan all day long, but if the other person's not in the same playbook, there's going to be problems.
That's like what we were talking about in our last video, where we're talking about communication.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to make sure that we clearly understand the desires of the other person. And I don't remember if I've said this already, but if I have, forgive me, but intimacy isn't just about sex. Intimacy is about into me, see. Know who I am. Know what my dreams are. Know what my desires are. Know what equals love to me.
Right.
But that comes back from nurturing that relationship. Just, when you have children, the children don't become part of the marriage. They're just part of the family.
Right.
That marriage is still just between two people. And so, same thing is true of if it ends in divorce or if it comes to divorce. Those children are not in that marriage, and they do not need to know the intimate details about what went wrong.
That's right.
They don't need to know that. None of their business. None of their business.
And as an attorney, I can tell you the judge doesn't really want them to know either.
Yeah.
And that can get
That speaks highly of judges.
Well, it does, and I mean that's the way you want to get in trouble with the judge. Find out that you're talking way more than you're supposed to with the children. Now, obviously, you're going to have to give them a little bit of insight, but there's a right way and a wrong way to do that, and that goes into a lot of detail that's better suited for its own separate episode. But you're exactly right. Dee, appreciate the insight. We're going to have some contact information at the end of each video, where if you want to get some further one-on-one time with Dee, you can do so. And if you're to the point where you think you need to talk to me, my contact information will be there as well. Again, my name is Dusty King with King & King PLC. This is Dee Wright with The Starting Place. Until next time, thanks for joining us.